As usual, we invite people who work with young people or on behalf of young people, or in fact young people themselves who took part in the survey to come along to hear some of the key findings of what we found out in the survey before we make everything available to the public. I mean, there have been a couple of media interviews that you may have heard about one aspect of our study, the self-harm. But we give a taste of the other areas as well. And the format is going to be that I will do a brief introduction, and then Paula Devine will talk about our findings on the financial well-being of young people. And we've produced a research update for that. And it compares actually two survey findings, the Kids Life and Times and the Young Life and Times. Kids Life and Times, for those who are not aware of that, is a survey of P7 children that we undertake every year. So there are some interesting findings that came out of that. And then I'll take you through some of the other findings, the mental health and self-harm questions. And that was, of course, what you would have expected, what the media focused on. And it is interesting because we revisited the questions after asking them for the first time in 2008 and see what has changed, if anything has changed. And then I'll talk a little bit about community belongings and community relations, although not that much. We have an event forthcoming in relation to the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey on the 12th of June, and we will have a research update comparing the adults with the young people on that occasion. But key findings we'll talk about today briefly, and of course you can access them online as well. So that's the format, and I hand over at that point, not quite at that point, but very soon, to Paula Devine. Just a quick background about the survey. Again, we undertake that survey on an annual basis, and we've done so now for 11 years. In fact, that makes it the longest running survey of that type in the UK and Ireland now, and we should be proud about that. We are proud about that. So, which enabled us to monitor attitudes and beliefs and experiences of 16-year-olds for quite some time. Last year, we had 1,367 respondents, and we recruit our respondents through the Child Benefit Register. Child Benefit used to be, until very recently, a universal benefit paid to everybody who brings up children in the UK. And we were able to access everyone born in February and March. So it's a universal sample, generally speaking. Now, the Conservative and Liberals thought that it's not a good idea to pay child benefit to people who are well off or very well off. So it's not universally paid anymore. But the way it is processed basically means that the details of every 16-year-old are still recorded with HMRC. And we have access to that. So whilst there's been a change in the way child benefit has been paid recently, we still include the very well-off children from very well-off families because of the way the child benefit or any other tax credits really administered. There's three means of completing the survey. Most young people complete a postal questionnaire, and we thought for a long time that online is the way to go. But every year we get predominantly postal questionnaires back, and we've had focus group discussions with young people about that, changing the mood of the survey and so on. And the majority keeps telling us that if they receive a well-designed postal questionnaire, which is nice to look at, including a free return envelope, then that's the way they like to respond. And our response rates show that. We have the highest proportion ever who completed online, partially probably due to the fact that we actually pay them £10 if they do. But still, we have 82% who complete on paper. So that's the way it is. The prize draw has taken place, and the money was gratefully received by 5 of the respondents 2 weeks ago. So that happens every year as well as an encouragement. So we had three main areas, as I said already. We were asking questions about community relations and belonging, and we repeated questions on mental health and self-harm that we asked for the first time in 2008. So we revisited the findings, from 5 years ago. And we asked questions on financial well-being, and most of those were funded by the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, but the last set of questions on financial well-being was funded by a research initiative here within Queen's, which is called Improving Children's Lives. Okay, there are other areas like background questions, and we always ask questions that are suggested by the respondents from the previous year, and I'll talk about a couple of those later on. So, that's some of the background, so to give you a sense who are the people who respond to the survey. The majority is female, so the males are slightly reluctant to complete the survey, or let's say more reluctant than the females are. So we have a slight gender imbalance, but that's typical for surveys of any kind, really, that females are more likely to respond. We have a slight majority of Catholics, and that's of course reflective of the demographic changes that have happened in Northern Ireland over the recent years. And we have a relatively high proportion, almost a quarter, who say they have no religion or of other religions. And we do have some Muslims or some Sikh respondents, and respondents that have other religions. A couple of them say they were Jedis. So you have those responses as well, but you can see the majority is Catholic Protestants, relatively reflective of the background in terms of religious belonging. And the same can be said about the educational background. We have about 7% who go to plant integrated schools in Northern Ireland, and that's the same proportion that we have in our survey. We have a very slight overrepresentation in relation to the grammar schools. And that's probably, if you add the others, some of the young people in the survey takes place have in fact already left school. They're already in colleges of further education or not in school anymore, because the fieldwork takes place in November and December time. So some of the 16-year-olds will have left at that stage. We always ask about sexual orientation as well. And you can see that we have about 8% who identify as same-sex attracted. We ask about who they live with. 3/4 approximately live with both of their parents. And we ask about family financial background, and we will revisit that for a number of times. So I'm not going into too much detail at the moment. Okay, and at that point, I really do hand over to Paula Devine to take us through the financial well-being. So.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dirk. I want to talk to you about a pilot project that we did that was supported by the Improving Children's Lives initiative, as Dirk already mentioned, which is looking at the family financial background of young children and young people in Northern Ireland. So, as Dirk has mentioned, this actually includes data from two different surveys. So, the Young Life and Time survey of 16-year-olds and the Kids Life and Time survey of Primary 7 children who are aged 10 or 11. So we did this for several reasons. One of them is for methodological work that we're doing, which is looking at trying to create indicators of financial well-being and financial background for children and young people. And the other is just our general purpose of running these surveys so that we can record and make known the attitudes and experiences of children and young people living in Northern Ireland. Obviously, over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, the recession has been has a huge impact on everybody's lives. If we look at many of the indicators or way that we report policymakers or lobbying organisations, look at these. They're looking at very macro level indicators. They're looking at things like gross national product, gross domestic product. They're looking at unemployment rates. So they're very much at a very macro high level. Also then you'll have things like child poverty strategy within Northern Ireland and other regions, and they're looking at child poverty particularly within family financial background. So that's looking at family income, household income. But what we were sitting down thinking one day, well, actually, I'm on all this. Where is the voices and experience of children and young people in an everyday life? So we decided to try and explore this in a bit more of cohesive fashion. That's not to say, of course, that we haven't been asking these questions over the years, and within both of these surveys we've tried to include some measure of I suppose in other surveys we'd probably say it's a measure of social class or it's a measure of household income, but of course these are 10 and 11-year-olds or they're 16-year-olds, so those indicators aren't applicable to them. But we have tried to put some kind of a proxy within the survey, again being reflective of the age of the respondents that we have. So within the Young Life and Time survey of 16-year-olds, since 2005, we've been asking a question about how well off do you think your family is financially? And you can see actually I think we were quite surprised here that those trends are pretty consistent throughout the years. So we have about just over 50%, just over half of respondents said that their family is about average. We have just over a quarter say that their family is well off, and just under a quarter say that their family isn't well off. There are slight nuances in that because the question actually is a 5-point scale, but we've just aggregated those for the sake of this graph. But we thought that since 2005 there might be more variation over the years, and actually there isn't. What is one noteworthy point is that the vast majority of respondents are able to answer this question, and this is something that I'll come back to later. So it's about 3% every year aren't able to, they say they don't know, so they're not sure how to answer that question. They can't make a judgment on their family's financial background. I suppose you could say there's a lot of work going on looking at subjective measures of poverty, and I suppose we tend to, in a recession perhaps it's about relative deprivation rather than absolute deprivation. Perhaps we compare ourselves to our next door neighbours and we think, well, actually that's average. So you're making comparisons, and if everybody's income is going down or everybody's experienced having to cut back, well then you're saying, well, yes, it's average because that's how the rest of the population is making. So there's a lot of research that is looking at subjective measures of poverty, and I suppose perhaps that is one explanation of why those trends haven't changed much over time. So we asked another question then, and again this has been asked since 2009, and it asks about the extent to which the economic crisis or recession has affected you and your family. Again, this is of the Young Life and Times of 16-year-olds, and you can see there's a lot more variation here. Especially in 2011, we found that nearly a half of respondents said that the economic crisis had actually affected their family a lot or quite a little. The proportions have gone down a bit since then, but you can see there is obviously an impact of the recession upon 4 out of 10 of respondents in the 2013 Life and Time survey. So perhaps this measure is actually measuring something quite different to your family financial background. It's looking at the impact that recession has had. Of note here is about 10%, about 10% of respondents said that they're not sure, that they don't know how to answer that, and that's compared to about 3% who said that they didn't know in terms of their family financial background. So it's quite interesting. These two questions are obviously tapping into different measures. Within the Kids Life and Time survey then, obviously it's of 10 and 11-year-olds, so we try to reflect their age when we're designing the questions. So we didn't think that those questions were necessarily, the questions that we asked in the Young Life and Time survey would necessarily be appropriate or understandable by 10 and 11-year-olds. So since 2009 we have included questions from the Family Affluence Scale, and that is a measure that has been devised by the World Health Organization, and it's a 4-item scale. It's mainly based on common consumption and material deprivation, and we wanted to look at this scale. I say we have included it for the last 4 years, and it's something that we were never quite sure how it worked or why it worked. It seemed to be a good proxy for something like a measure of deprivation or a measure of income or a measure of social class, but the individual items themselves we thought are slightly strange, and this is something a strange phenomenon that has been found among other research as well. So the family affluence scale, as I say, consists of 4 items. Does the respondent have their own bedroom? There's family ownership of a vehicle, and it's whether they have not 1 or 2 or more. The number of holidays away that they've had in the last year, and then the number of computers and laptops. And as you can imagine, some of those are very culturally or geographically distinct. So having your own bedroom will depend on the number of children in the family. In some regions, in some communities, the number of children may be higher than in others. Also in some countries, regions, house sizes are much bigger. So it's maybe not tapping into a direct indicator of family financial well-being. Family ownership of a vehicle, again, that can be very geographically distinct. So the context there, so living in a rural area, having a car or access to some vehicle in a place where public transport isn't perhaps as accessible as it is within an urban area, obviously then there will be variations there. Number of holidays away, again that depends on the type of holiday, where it is, how long it's for. So a 3-week trip to Disneyland in Florida is obviously very different to going to a day trip to Portrush, so that is quite significant. And also then the number of computers and laptops. So when we've asked these questions over the last few years, we've found very little variation in the proportion of children who say that they have their own bedroom. They're about 4 out of 5, 79% have their own bedroom, and that has remained fairly consistent over the years. We find that most children are saying that their families have access or own some type of vehicle, car, truck or van, whatever. I suppose one figure of note is that in 2009, 69% of children said that their family owned 2 or more vehicles. This had fallen to 57% within 2013. So perhaps maybe reflects the impact of the recession, or families maybe cutting down, so to speak, in the number of vehicles that they have. We found that 25% over the years, about a quarter of children say that they go on holidays. They've gone on holiday at least twice over the last year. And that hasn't changed much over the years. One figure that has changed is in relation to the number of computers. The vast majority, about 98-99% of children have said, my family own at least 1 computer and laptop, and maybe that's not surprising. We found that about 2/3 said this in 2009, but this had risen to 77% in 2013. And again, perhaps that isn't that's surprising given the kind of technological explosion that there has been over the last few years. So we found that when we looked within the family affluence scale, you can do all the calculations and then assign respondents to a particular level of affluence. So we found that just over a half would have been what the originators of the scale would describe as high affluence, and that was fairly consistent across the years. But I think some of these, when you look in particular at these items and what they mean and the cultural and geographical context of them, I think that that figure of 52% is hiding a lot of qualitative change that isn't obvious when you look at this overall, whether somebody's in low affluence, medium affluence or high affluence. So that was something that we wanted to look at as well within the Kids Life and Time survey, because we felt that perhaps the family affluence scale isn't a particularly valid or reliable measure. So in order to tap into that, we included some questions across both surveys, both Kids Life and Times and Young Life and Times. So one of the questions was, do you feel that your family has enough money to buy ordinary things? And we thought we defined ordinary things as being food and clothes, or special things, and special things would have been things like holidays or games, computers, whatever. Can see that there were a few variations across the survey. So about 2/3 of Kids Life and Times respondents said that, yeah, they felt that their family had enough money for special things, enough money for ordinary things. Whereas that was a lower proportion among the Young Life and Times respondents, who were 16. However, 3% across both surveys said that they felt that their family didn't have enough money for ordinary things or enough money for special things. So I suppose that 3% who really acknowledge the financial problems and issues in terms of affording everyday items is really significant within that. Although the numbers are small, that's 3% of 4.5 respondents to the Kids in Life and Time survey. That's a lot of children out there. But I suppose one thing of note maybe is the higher proportion of Kids Life and Time survey who said, yeah, family are doing okay compared to Young Life and Times. And we wondered if maybe that just reflects the fact that the Kids Life and Times respondents are 10, 11-year-old and perhaps they're not maybe as aware of financial stresses and household bills compared to the Young Life and Times survey. So then we asked what kind of things, for those who said that their family had a problem affording either the special things or the ordinary things, and the special things, what kind of things they are. Now, obviously, we have a lot of responses, so I've just kind of put in a few here. Among the Kids Life and Time survey, most of these tend to reflect holidays, trips, days out, meals out, as well as computers, electronic toys, games consoles, iPads, iPhones, that kind of thing. And I've just put in a couple of interesting comments here from the kids who were 10, 11. One of them said, which I think in a very mature way, pointless things that we don't really need, which I thought was quite observant and astute for a 10, 11-year-old. Another said fancy holidays, fancy computers like iPads and other tablets, which, obviously a lot of pressure to feel that because a lot of their other children have them. And then another extremely mature point, I thought, extra holidays and extra birthday parties, brackets, I don't blame them, there is a recession going on. I mean, I thought for a 10 or 11-year-old to have that level of awareness was really astute. So we asked the same thing among Young Life and Times respondents, and again, similar kind of things came up. It was about iPhones, it was about iPads, about holidays abroad, that kind of thing. Again, I think this first quote sums it up. We have money for stuff we need, but not for stuff we want. So I thought that just summed it up very well. And again, kind of highlighting the pressure among young people to have the things that everybody else in their class might have, and the kind of mental pressure and stress that not being able to afford it might bring them. One respondent said, to feel part of my peer group, my family doesn't have enough money to afford iPhones, laptops, designer clothes, holidays abroad, which obviously they feel that the rest of their peer group has. Then someone else said, we can't afford holidays or a lot of new expensive technology like iPads, iPhones. We can afford some special items, but we have to consider what we ask for, as we don't have a high price range. So obviously this young person is thinking about their whole family financial background and what they can ask for or not ask for within their family. And obviously Apple is doing some job of advertising that it seems to be iPhones and iPads that are mentioned. Nobody's saying, well, actually, I want a little Huddle tablet from Tesco's. But I think what's interesting then, within Young Life and Times, there were more respondents who mentioned the day-to-day bills, who are obviously much more aware of the pressures of running a household. So one respondent said oil, food, electric. Another, there's sometimes not enough money for food at the end of the month, and sometimes there may be no money for gas. And then I think this other quote then just really brings together the themes of today's presentations about financial well-being and also about mental health as well. It's not about the money, it's about excessive working hours for my dad, working 24/7 to be paid only about a third of the money owed. This caused fighting, fatigue and stress. So I think that sums up the pressures that a lot of families, and hence 16-year-olds and all other ages of young people are facing. So leading on then to mental health, within the Young Life and Time survey, we measure mental health or the potential for psychological distress using the General Health Questionnaire, which is a standardised questionnaire that is used in a wide range of surveys across different populations. As you might think, it consists of 12 different items. trying to tap into how people have been feeling over the last 4 weeks. So I've just highlighted a few of the items here. So it's about being able to concentrate. It's about, are you losing sleep over worry? Do you feel you're playing a useful part in things? Are you making decisions? Are you under strain? Do you feel that you can't overcome your difficulties? Get technical about it. There's 2 ways of coding the responses to these 12 items, and we're going to look at these different ways within our presentations today. The first of them basically adds up people's responses. There's 4 different responses available to each item. They're added up, and basically there's a score between 0 and 36. Higher scores reflect poor mental health. That's a very good way then of, you can calculate mean scores for different groups. So it could be, say, comparing the mean scores of males versus females, and I know that's something Dirk could be looking at later. It could be across any type of group. Another way then is that the responses are recalculated, and the number of items that the respondent, there's a potential problem according to their responses. So if they've identified a potential problem for at least 4 of the 12 items, then they're what's called a case, which isn't very psychiatric term, not necessarily one that we should be using, but we couldn't think of another thing. So that's quite a useful way to, again, comparing across groups to see the proportion within each group that has a threshold of 4 or more. So I'm just going to finish up by looking at the caseness, that is those who had a threshold of 4 or more by family financial background, and you can see that there is very much a variation according to the family financial background there. So I think it's just a way of highlighting that different groups are experiencing different pressures. Whether these are directly related to the family financial background or whether it's actually a proxy for something else is something that we want to explore with further research. So what did this tell us? Well, the Kids Life and Times, Young Life and Times respondents come from a wide range of backgrounds. What we want to do further is try to explore the measurement of family financial background in their kind of methodological work that we're going to be doing later. There is strong association between family financial background and how well families are managing financially. I haven't gone through that in this presentation, but it's within the research update that you hopefully picked up earlier. Extracurricular school activities cause financial problems. We did look at particular costs and expenses that young people have in relation to school in terms of school uniform. Are young people, do they feel that their families are able to afford school uniform? Are they able to afford school day trips? Are they able to afford school holidays? And we found in particular that these extracurricular school activities are causing problems. And in particular among Young Life and Times respondents, these school holidays, a lot of respondents were saying that their family were really struggling to afford these. That was a higher proportion compared to Kids Life and Times, but we feel that there might be a qualitative difference in the type of holidays or school holidays and trips that 16-year-olds within secondary level schools are being asked to participate in compared to those of in primary school. And again, you can find out more about that in the research update. And then as I just said, the Young Life and Times respondents from less well-off backgrounds have poor mental health. So the data is all very new, so that's just our initial analysis of it for now. We hope to do further analysis with this data, and we hope then to run some further research trying to look at how best we can use this data to inform the creation of a new measure or adapt a measure of family financial background. So thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I move on to talk very briefly about the mental health and self-harm issue now. And again, it's just a whistle-stop tour, and I apologize for that, but the data will be available for everyone on our website from this afternoon or the very latest Monday morning, but I think this afternoon, all being well. So I just compare here the caseness, as Paula mentioned before that. So that's one of the 2 measures of mental health and using the GHQ. And cases really are, that identifies the proportion of people that we should perhaps be worried about. And I compare the very first time when we asked that was in 2004, with the very last time in 2013. And you can see that there is a level of consistency, and the data consistently show that females at 16 are more likely to experience mental and emotional health problems than males, or at least are more likely to express these issues. And we also see that there is a slight change compared to 2004, a slight increase, and that increase is reflective in both the males and the females. So we currently have a situation that we have almost 4 in 10 of females who are such cases, if you excuse me using that term, and that compares with just about half the proportion amongst males, 18.5%, as you can see. So overall, we have a situation about 1 in 3 16-year-olds that deal with potentially serious emotional and mental health problems. So it's not something we could just ignore. It's a serious issue. Paula has already alluded to the background, some of the background variables, and the main one being the financial well-being. Of course, we've seen a lot of investment recently in mental health services in schools, school counseling services, child and adolescent mental health services, and so on. And they, of course, can help young people dealing with those issues. But there are underlying issues which are, financial poverty sometimes, and school counselors can't counsel away poverty or social exclusion. And we have to be taking that more serious. The data here show clearly that those from well-off backgrounds are much less likely to be experiencing stressful situations. And again, the males are much less likely to experience stressful situations than females. There is a difference in terms of the school type, but the difference wouldn't suggest that grammar school just don't need to worry about it, because the kids come from better off backgrounds than traditionally, the secondary school kids would come from integrated schools. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference, but it's not a very significant difference. So it's something that needs to be addressed in all types of schools, really. And that here compares the findings. In brackets, you will always see the findings from the 2008 survey. So you can see the changes that have taken place over the years. And if I just highlight the fact that in the third row there, you can see people responding to the question saying that they haven't had any serious emotional or mental health problems for which they thought they needed help. And you can see overall, it was 71% of 16-year-olds in the 2013 survey who responded that way. And that compares with 75% in 2008. So there has been a slight increase amongst the 16-year-olds who feel that they have, in the recent past, suffered serious emotional and mental health problems for which they felt they needed professional help. There's very little change in relation to young people seeking help, and you can see that in the second row there. So there's a slight increase. And that's, I suppose, maybe one of the effects of the adolescent mental health services being rolled out in schools and so on. There's a slight increase from 9% to 11% amongst all respondents in those 5 years who actually said, well, yes, I had those problems and I went to seek professional help. This table looks at those young people who said they thought about self-harming but didn't actually do so. And again, if I want to highlight the proportion overall, it's probably useful to look at the first row, which it's a proportion of those who said they didn't have problems like that. And that was 87% in 2013, compared with 86% in 2008. There has been hardly any change at all. Statistically, we could say there has been no change over the 5-year period. That one here looks, however, at changes amongst the young people who did say that they did self-harm in the past year or few months. And the one change that I want to point out here is the one in the last row, and that's a proportion of young people who said they did so more than once in the last few months. So the data overall is relatively consistent, there has been an increase from 10% to 13%, so that we are now have 13% of 16-year-olds who said they did self-harm, and the increase has been amongst those who did so more than once, and the rise here is from 5% to 8%, so we have 8% now in 2013 who did self-harm more. So from that point of view, you may ask, mental health services have been rolled out, mental health messages have been communicated, but we don't really see any change. If there's any change, it is that it's a higher proportion of young people who self-harmed. But that's only half of the story. We really need to look at differences in relation to background variables. And the two background variables that really stand out is gender and the well-being, financial background, as I said. So if you look at that, serious emotional or mental health problems, if you look at the first set of figures there, so we have a situation where 16% of males who come from well-off backgrounds suffered serious mental or emotional health problems. And that compares with over half of females who come from not well-off backgrounds. So that difference is very significant. Okay, so we need to be worried about these females. We need to be worried about people who are from not well-off backgrounds. And the same applies to self-injury. When we quote the figure of 13% overall, it's only half the story really, because if you compare the well-off males, we have 6%, but look at the not well-off females, we have over a quarter, 1 in 4. So in schools and some areas where predominantly you have young people from not well-off backgrounds, we have the situation that 1 in 4 of the females there might self-harm. Okay, something else that education programs, of course, can address is attitudes towards self-harm. And we have some changes in relation to that that are noteworthy. In particular, if you look at the fourth row here, respondents agreeing that people do self-harm for attention. And we've had a significant decrease here. 39%, 4 in 10 said that, gave that response that they believed people self-harm because they're attention-seeking in 2008. And that figure has actually reduced to 25%. And you may say that that might be one of the effects of mental health promotion programs in schools or outside of schools, that there's a greater realization amongst young people now that self-harm doesn't happen because people seek attention. The underlying reasons why that happens, and the greater proportion of young people appear to realize that now. And that's a general population. That's not just the 16-year-olds who were self-harming themselves. That's everybody in the survey. And we have some of the quotes here as well that you may find insightful. There are about 500 of the 1,300 young people who gave quotes. And again, all of those are made available online, so you can look through those. And sometimes it is really insightful to look at those and, together with the statistics. The first one here says that people feel depressed a lot of times and stressed, or self-harm just doesn't have the confidence to talk to someone because they feel they would be judged, or that they do not have anyone they could trust enough with how they feel. Another one, 16-year-old said that it makes them physically ill to think about depression and anxiety, and it affects every part of your life. That small tasks are very difficult to do. It goes unnoticed, nobody helps, and you search for help, and even then it's not enough and it can be dismissed. And the last example here is that people are absorbed in their own problems, and so they care if, so care if they see your cuts. Others who don't know you claim that there's nothing wrong and that you're attention-seeking, and alluded to that. But they say it's a problem that many people don't really see, and it's very difficult in relation to judgment to deal with that. I think due to time, I'll skip that. Okay, so those are really just the headline findings. There are about 30 questions that were asked in relation to that, and again, you can have a look at that later. Community relations and belongings. Okay, so we have elections looming. Okay, so that will be a test again for the level of community relations in some respect. But in our surveys, we have, of course, over years monitored how people feel. about other communities and so on. So that table here shows a sense of belonging to the community in which young people live and to Northern Ireland overall, and the sense of decision makings. And why do we ask about decision making? Because, of course, we have the United Nations Convention of the Right of the Child. Young people have a right to be consulted about decisions, so it's important. We just had the report earlier this year, the UK report that was submitted, and of course it's important for the UK government to show that they've made progress in relation to how young people are included in decision making that affects them, and those statistics are quite insightful in relation to that notion. Okay, so we have hardly any difference between Protestants and Catholics in relation to the sense of belonging to the neighborhood. So 79 and 80%. But those who identify neither as Catholic nor as Protestant show much less a sense of belonging. Only just about half felt that they had a sense of belonging to the neighborhood in which they lived. Okay. And that could be people who migrated to Northern Ireland and who don't identify as Catholic or Protestants, but it could also be people who are from Northern Ireland and have Irish or British parents and just don't identify as Protestants or Catholics. So all of those are included in that category. Now, if you look at the sense of belonging to Northern Ireland, you can see that, and you would probably expect that, the Protestants have a much greater sense of belonging than the Catholics, 81% compared to 64%. So in this relation, the Catholics are very close, actually, to those who have no religion. But look at the sense of influence on decision-making in Northern Ireland and in their own communities. So we have less than 1 in 4 who feel that they have any influence on decision-making in the neighborhood. Okay, and that goes down to as little as 7 in 100, 7% amongst those who identify neither as Catholics or Protestants. And the figure is even lower at Northern Irish level, where less than 1 in 10 feel that they have any say in decisions who are made about them just generally decisions made in Northern Ireland. To finish off this section on community relations, I want to give an update on the questions that we ask every year, and we monitor those. And that's the believing the relations between Protestants and Catholics are better now than they were 5 years ago. And last year we reported a dip, and we very much felt that that was to do with the flag protests, which coincided with the time when the survey was undertaken. And now, does that mean that we have recovered from that? No, it doesn't. So the dip has actually increased. So there's now a higher proportion than last year amongst 16-year-olds who feel that the relations are not as good as they were 5 years ago. And that's true for all Catholics, Protestants, and those with no religion. It's slightly less of a dip if you look at the optimism towards community relations in the next 5 years. Again, we still have a dip, but the curve is not so steep. So there has been a decrease, but the decrease hasn't been quite as fast. Last question in relation to the community relations. So is religion then always going to make a difference in how people feel about each other? And I just want to point out here that, of course, the figure doesn't start at 0, it starts at 70%. Okay, so the graph might be slightly misleading. So we started off in 2003 with 85% feeling that religion is always going to make a difference about how people feel about each other. Now there's been a steady decline to that, but we still have about almost 8 in 10 of young people who still feel that way in 2013, despite the fact that they've been born after the ceasefire. So that's the situation. The last 2 questions I want to finish off are questions that were suggested by 16-year-olds. And as I said, we last year. And as I said, we take this very serious. We take at least 5 questions each year from respondents, what they suggest we should be asking. And we feel that young people's suggestions, and they're very elaborate and ambitious in the suggestions what we should ask, gives us a good sense of the issues that they deal with, and we feel it's important to take some of those on board. We don't have space to take them all, of course, but we make sure we take some. And those are 2 questions we've never asked before, and but we know there has been debate about it. The first question is in relation to voting age, and that's very timely with the European elections coming up next week. So should voting age be reduced to 16? And of course there are lobbying groups about that as well, the youth councils and so on. The evidence from the general population of 16-year-olds, I'm interested to see what you think there. There's a respondent there who's a politics student as well in your school. I don't know what you think about that. But the evidence suggests that we have only about 4 in 10, in fact less than 4 in 10 of the 16-year-olds who feel voting age should be reduced to 16. Okay. And interestingly, the perception might be that it's the grammar school kids who are taking interest in politics, who very much feel that voting age should be reduced so that young people have a say. But in fact, our statistics show that it's not the grammar school kids who feel that way. In fact, they are significantly less likely than those at secondary schools or integrated schools to feel that way. Now, why that is, we don't know. That's a matter of speculation, probably a matter of further research that we should take on, but that is the situation. And the first graph mightn't surprise you either. There is a perception that females are more interested in cooking than in politics. I'm saying it's a perception. I'm not saying that it's the truth, but the data would certainly suggest that the males are more enthusiastic about reducing the voting age to 16 than the females are. Okay. The last question I want to address, and again, that was a suggestion by 16-year-olds last year, is something that I think we need to really look at more detail. And it's sort of the elephant in the room. And the question is about tutoring, whether young people have ever received private tutoring during their school career. And you can see here that we've had about 60% they said they've never had tutoring, so that means 4 in 10 16-year-olds at some point in their school career had private tutoring. Okay. Well, that could have been in primary school. 13% said that was only in primary school, possibly to prepare them for the 11+ tests or the equivalent of the 11+ tests. But it was also, we had 12% in post-primary schools, and 1 in 10 had tutoring in both post-primary and primary level schools. And why do I say it's an elephant in the room? It's an elephant in the room because it's completely unregulated, of course. Anybody in the room here could call themselves a tutor today or tomorrow, set themselves up, and provide tutoring services for which the parents have to pay, or the kids have to pay, or someone else in the family has to pay. It's completely unregulated, and the fact that 4 in 10 overall have the need to receive private tutoring in addition to statutory educational provision is something that we probably need to look at in more detail. Okay, just to finish off the forthcoming things. So we have a research update coming up next month, written by Katie Hayward, who's in the back of this room here, about this issue of belonging, community belonging, influence. And that will compare the Northern Ireland Life and Times and Young Life and Times results. I haven't talked about Northern Ireland Life and Times today, of course, at all. We also have a research update coming up comparing the self-harm issues in more detail that I could provide today. And that will be written by Mark McCann, who is an excellent researcher who's just moved to Glasgow, at the university there, to work in more detail on health-related research. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And that should be available in the next sort of 8 weeks as well. We have a new survey, I'm very glad to say that, coming out in autumn 2014. So we're delighted that we have funding in place to run yet another survey. And I should also say that you all met Martina McKnight at the start when you walked into the room. And due to changes in our job profiles, both Katrina Lloyd, who is here and runs the Kids Life and Times survey, and myself, and we had to recruit someone who helps us with the running of the 2 surveys. So if you have any interest in the surveys, you can still talk to us, of course, as well, anybody in the ARC team really, but Martina McKnight will be the person who will probably be your prime contact in future in relation to the 2 surveys. And I encourage you to keep up with the website. The data will be made available today. And also, of course, we do social networking, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. If you have any messages for us or want to hear messages from us, please use our Twitter and Facebook account. So the last thing I need to say is to thank everybody at the ARC team. It's a team effort as every year. So I'm grateful for that. And yes, I invite your questions if you have any. Thank you very much for your attention.